This is the panel on new breakthroughs in computational law. And I was very happy to be here all day and also listen to the first talk by Professor Goodenough. He gave an excellent introduction to what we are going to do also here. And what is very nice for me, I'm an artificial intelligence and law researcher. Apparently the idea of computational law is mainstream. Well, that's new for me. So the field of artificial intelligence and law, it has been around for a while. So let's say 25 years ago, more or less, we started an international conference series on artificial intelligence and law. And actually in June in San Diego, we will have the next edition. Ted Sickelman and Gardner, both organizing this conference, are also here. So if you want to meet the scientists behind this next phase of legal technology, then you can also go there. But that's academic research. So the first thing that we will do is introduce ourselves. So I'm Bart Verheij. I'm now in Groningen in the Netherlands. But in the previous academic year, I had the great opportunity to be a residential fellow here at the CodeX Center for Legal Informatics. And as a kind of sabbatical researcher, I worked on my models of argumentation in the law. I'm a mathematician by training. But when I started to do my PhD research, I entered a law school, and that's how it happened. I wanted to see the real world, let's say, mathematics as well, the ideal world of ideas, formal ideas even. And then I wanted to do something that might even become relevant. Well, that became AI and law. And we have a very interesting panel here. I would like to ask each of them to present themselves. So first, Harm.
Yes, my name is Harm. I'm a legal tech entrepreneur from the Netherlands. I met Bart here at Stanford. That's a coincidence because he's also from the Netherlands. And we never met before in the small country. But I founded my startup back in 2002 in the Netherlands. The speed of innovation is not that fast as here in Silicon Valley. But I moved here last year because we signed up some US clients. My company is helping corporations all over the world with the automation of legal work. So we work for the legal department and not for the law firm. And I've seen legal tech since 2002. My background is law. I'm not a computer scientist. But I've seen a lot of innovation. But last year there is a real lot of innovation. So I think we are on a very interesting moment in history of legal tech, and the next 10 years will be, in any event, disruptive for a lot of people working in legal, and I will explain that later during this panel.
Thank you. Houman?
Hi, I'm Houman Shadab. I'm a professor of law at New York Law School. My research and teaching and writing focuses on financial law, and increasingly in the past few years on the intersection of finance, technology, and law, including general fintech issues and cryptocurrencies, blockchains, and Bitcoin. And I'm really excited to be here. I think the whole day has been utterly fantastic, and I look forward to discussing the issues with you. Thanks.
Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Stark, and my research and past work has involved the open internet and the intersection between the internet, its effects on society, the economy, culture, and the law. I've worked a lot on open source issues, the intersection of the internet and controls, so points of controls, decentralization versus centralization. That's part of where the blockchain and cryptocurrency, Bitcoin aspect comes in. I taught at Yale. I'm a fellow at Yale, and also was a lecturer here at Stanford, and I'm now engaged in working to promote decentralized technology and entrepreneurship in the digital currency space. And by the way, thanks for coming in here when it's so beautiful outside, so we appreciate that.
Aaron.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aaron Wright. First, I just want to thank CodeX for inviting me to come here. I think the program's been really inspiring, and I think I've been highly impressed with all the wonderful work that a number of people are doing here. I'm a clinical law professor at Cardozo Law School in New York. I'm also the director of a group called the Cryptocurrency Research Group, which is a group of academics and programmers and other people who are focused on understanding blockchain technology and just kind of its impact on the law. Before joining the staff at Cardozo, I sold a company to Jimmy Wales, the guy who founded Wikipedia. I worked for the for-profit arm of Wikipedia called Wikia. I helped build an open source search engine, so I'm kind of this odd duck. I actually am a programmer and a lawyer. I know how to implement a lot of these technologies. And I'm excited to talk about blockchain technology and actually explain and hopefully shed some light on how these technology can help you do a lot of the things that you were talking about today.
Thank you all. So the panel is called New Breakthroughs in Computational Law. So at least also a word on what computational law is. Especially also Mike de Nazareth, the scientific director of the CodeX Center for Legal Informatics, has been working on defining those terms. And what he uses as a definition, more or less, is that computational law is the idea that you are going to represent the law and its concepts in such a format that a computer can actually execute those the law and its concepts, let's say. So there is an example of that, computable contracts, and Harm will speak about it in a minute. But an example that Mike likes to use also is the idea of a cop in the back seat. So think of yourself driving your car, and the car actually tells you about the legal situation that you are in. For instance, here you can only drive that number of miles per hour, or this is a place where you cannot make a U-turn or things like that. And for instance, for a foreigner like myself, that would be very helpful. When I came here with my family in 2013, I had to learn that you sometimes can turn right on red, right? And how did I learn? Because, well, there were those signs that you sometimes cannot. Well, and maybe then your car, the cop in the back seat, can explain that to you while you are driving or something like that. And well, so that's also a phase that is coming. So we had a very useful systematization of computational law presented by Professor Goodenough. So the idea of computational law 1.0, where we are using our text editors and our word processing and our Googles, etc., just like everybody else. We are past that more or less. Then there is the phase 2.0, where we are accepting the law as it is and trying to embed that in computer systems or something like that, for instance, in knowledge-based systems or in data analytics. And then there is the phase where we are more or less now, and many people here in this audience are already thinking about it. That's where we are making the transition to computational law 3.0, where we are really rethinking the business. How can we do it differently, maybe better? How can we make the law even as a better service for what we want to do, namely have a good society or something like that? But there will also be some hints of the phase after that here, because this is also the science fiction panel, let's say. I'm an artificial intelligence researcher, and, well, the blockchainers, they also have some distant dreams. And that's the 4.0 phase, let's say, when we don't only have those screens driving around with people moving them, but when they are really robots that maybe even become kind of autonomous identities or something like that. So also don't hesitate to walk to the microphones, because we also would like to see the audience interaction. This is the final panel, so this is really the time to do it. And now I give the floor to Harm, who is going to explain this idea of computable contracts that he is working on at CodeX.
Yes, so I moved here last year, and I had the opportunity to present my company at the weekly CodeX meeting. And during that meeting, I met Roland and Mike, and they were explaining to me that they had a previous fellow, Harry Surden, who was working in the computable contracts domain as a law fellow here at Stanford. And he wrote a very interesting article on computable contracts and how we can express natural language-based contracts in computable, readable language, so the computer can actually use that contract to execute performance systems. So at that point, I had my first experience with the legal system here in the United States. I moved here with a visa, and that was cancelled after a month. So I was illegal here for 7 months and was not able to do a lot of business. So I had the pleasure to spend a lot of time here at Stanford as a kind of a sabbatical. And I started to work with Mike and Roland and with Sudhir and John on the concept of what Harry Surden created in his legal paper, computable contracts. And our basic idea is that it's not really science fiction, because the Internet of Things is out there. There are millions of devices already connected to the Internet, and in 2025 probably billions of devices will be connected on the Internet, and all these devices will interact with each other, and they will sign contracts on behalf of the owners or the stakeholders of these devices. So the basic concept we are working on is the creation of a contract definition language, and we are using the concept in the game theory. So you can describe contracts in a logic way, so you can do automatic reasoning on what is in the contract. And we are working on that project with a couple of students and some other people in the computer science department. And I'm just a simple lawyer, so most of the times I'm listening, but not understanding what they are talking about. But we are making great progress, and we are actually working on some use cases in my client base and also on some theoretical use cases here at Stanford. And I think at this point, why I think the legal industry will be disrupted is because of, I call it the 3 Bs. I think there is a very interesting moment in history I just explained. It's because of that there is a lot of big data, and big data will learn us that the legal problems are not that big, because I think if you look at the legal space related to contracts, probably in the whole world we use a very limited set of clauses to express all our contracts, and by using big data we will find out that it's maybe small data. The other B is related to big money. You see in legal tech, when I started my company in 2002, no one was interested in legal tech at all. We had a movement related to e-discovery, but if you go to legal tech today, it's still all about e-discovery. But last year, there was a lot of innovation also from startups, and you see a lot of money from venture capitalists, available for smart people in the entrepreneurial domain who wants to create cool legal tech, and that was completely not the case when I started my company. So I think that's a very important driver of innovation, the availability of money, and even the big companies like Microsoft, IBM, Thomson Reuters, of course, are entering the legal industry because they all see that it's not just a fragmented industry, it's a really big business. It's $500 billion to $1 trillion in value, so there is a lot of money to make. So that's the second B, and I think the most important one is that the big minds are entering the legal domain as well. And I see it here at Stanford, and I think you will know, because you know more about blockchain than I do, but in the blockchain ecosystem here in Silicon Valley, but also in Berlin and in Amsterdam, the real smart people, the computer scientists, are looking at the legal domain now, and they are trying to solve the problem. And I think that's where the disruption will come from. It's not basically the law firm, but it's the computer scientist who knows how to solve a really complex problem by using computable contracts or other computational law. And that's why I think it's a really disruptive area in legal tech.
Thank you. So maybe now it's time for Aaron to explain a little bit about what this blockchain technology really is and how it is related to computational law.
So just before I start, who knows what a blockchain is or has heard the word before today? Okay, that's pretty good. So, I think the easiest way to kind of think about a blockchain is it's a collective database that's shared by a network of computers. So that's kind of technical, but an easier way to think of it is it's really memory for the internet, right? It's a collective repository where it can store information in a secure and incorruptible way that anybody can rely on if you are a member of that network. And so that has a wide range of applications. We're going to talk about them. But I mean, that's fundamentally what it is. It's data that's replicated across a bunch of different servers. It's governed by a protocol, and it's secured using cryptography and mathematics. And there's different ways to secure it. The largest blockchain-based network that we have is Bitcoin. It's secured through a mechanism called proof of work, which basically means that you are converting electricity into these coins that are called Bitcoin. So they're expending computational power, which requires electricity, and it's turning it into a coin, Bitcoin. And that's really the conversion that's happening. And because of that, these networks are highly secure, and they're permanent. So it's really hard to shut down the Bitcoin network. There's thousands of computers that are running it, and you basically have to simultaneously shut down all those computers for this collective memory to go away. But blockchains have a much broader application than just Bitcoin. So I mean, hopefully this is something you can come away with. This is a really broad range technology. So for example, UBS, big financial institution, is opening a blockchain-based lab in London to focus on how that can transform their industry. I think someone noted before that financial services are one of the largest consumers of legal technology. And not surprisingly, they're looking to this to kind of enhance enhance the way that they do business. And the way that they can do that is through a combination of computational contracts or smart contracts. Those are getting easier to do. You can also store other pieces of information like title. So something lawyers deal with extensively is just title, making sure that something is owned by somebody at a specific period of time. And something that that was just intimated is it's really going to be a big application in terms of just machines to machines. So when you start thinking about an autonomous world where you have autonomous machines, they can't pass around paper contracts if they need to do some sort of business. It needs to be in an electronic way. It needs to be in a computable way. So I think that we'll dive into that a bit more in the panel.
So Houman, do you want to continue on the idea of smart contracts?
Yeah, sure. So generally speaking, I see something as smart, and I'm sure we all do, to the extent it's digitized, to the extent it's automated, to the extent it's non-manual, non-paper-based. And the idea, I guess, of smart contracts is to the extent that performance of a contract is not being carried out by people, to the extent it's not being carried out with respect to people's discretion, but it is sort of pre-programmed ahead of time. So maybe in a purest sense, a smart contract is sort of a self-executing, self-enforcing rules mechanism to undertake some kind of business activity if we look at contracts in a business sense. Of course, contracts can be outside of the business logic or business area. And so one idea is, well, to what extent are they enforceable? To what extent do judges, maybe even legislatures, the UCC, for example, in the area of contracts with the sales of goods, need to sort of support these mechanisms, recognize them, give them legal certainty? I think that would be helpful. I think it'd be good in that respect to sort of support innovation so that companies or people, to the extent they're using these contracts, know that they have a certain amount of legal certainty. But going to the idea of the finance industry, I think the finance industry is kind of the cousin of the fintech, is kind of the cousin of legal tech in the sense that it's employing technology in areas of that sector that really haven't seen as much technology and competition and transparency and decreasing costs that it has in the past. At the same time, though, finance is way ahead of law in terms of employing technology, especially sort of in the trading side of things. So if you want to think about what is a smart contract, look at algorithmic trading mechanisms. Okay, in a sense, those are pre-programmed contracts that say if something happens in the real world, we'll buy or sell and trade and do it quickly. And maybe we're more familiar with high-frequency trading, which are really pre-programmed contracts to buy and sell really fast within nanoseconds these days. But why stop it? My question is, why stop at smart contracts? Why not have smart companies, smart enterprises, often in the blockchain space called distributed or decentralized autonomous companies, corporations? And the question is, we shouldn't stop at contracts because ultimately we need entities that need to be entering into these contracts and exiting from them. So I think the next logical step is to think about conceptually, first of all, what would it look like for a non-human and perhaps employee based firm to enter into contracts, to own assets, to have liabilities, to have some kind of limited liability to the extent it's even owned or has a concept of ownership, to have shareholders. And I don't think we don't have to think too hard because there's sort of analogs already out there in the corporate world that are like that. We can think about special purpose vehicles that were sort of made infamous by the financial crisis and Enron, which are basically employee-less trusts that have one specific purpose. It's usually to buy assets, house them, maybe trade them according to a relatively simple algorithm or trading pattern. And then we also have something that are called series LLC structures. So in one of my blog posts, I argue, well, if you're going to have this autonomous company, what would it look like and what kind of law do we need to support it? Maybe outside of the, us corporate lawyers sort of know that corporate law, organizational law is a very foundational body of rules that are needed for entities to exist, for shareholders to gain limited liability, and for the creditors of the shareholders not to have access to the ownership or the assets of the entity itself, and all the other things that companies do to provide gap-filling default rules to fill in the blanks when things are uncertain and so forth. So and that's primarily driven at the state level, and Delaware is the preeminent source of corporate law in the United States. And it's done through a series of enabling acts. And then you think about that's the legal framework that there is for companies, from corporations to LLCs to limited partnerships and so forth. And you think about what would be the proper or the best, or perhaps a new framework that's needed to support these and bring legal certainty to autonomous companies. And I argue it's something that looks more like a limited liability company framework, primarily because of its flexibility. In a limited liability company, you kind of get the best of partnerships, the best of corporations, and basically it's all by contract. You can even contract away fiduciary duties in the limited liability context, at least in Delaware, and most other states that adopted it. So I think that is a good fit. And then you think about things from one more perspective, a programming or software perspective. What sort of meshes with the way programmers think, and how do you kind of make that consistent with the way governance structures need to operate from an asset ownership and liability and payout perspective as well. And I think that it's something called a series LLC is really a really good way to go, because a series LLC is a type of LLC, a limited liability company, first recognized in the late 90s by Delaware, again, sort of an innovator in that space. And basically it's an LLC where you can form entities within it without having to go back to the state to actually say, hey, we need to form this company, fill out the requisite filing fee in the forms of the Secretary of State. Not that that's big of a hassle, but in terms of what would be the activities of an autonomous or even semi-autonomous company, probably be engaging in very specific profit-seeking software functions in terms of the code. It'd be trying things out, and if they work, add more capital to it, and if they don't, take away capital, maybe liquidate the assets of that function, and then probably distribute those assets and or liabilities to other parts of the LLC. So I think that that would be a good mesh. But my more general point is that law is needed out there to recognize smart contracts, to recognize smart companies, and to give sort of innovators the space to innovate and bring the certainty that's required to sort of sue and be sued. And just as an anecdote, maybe you heard, I think it was just last week, where a robot in Switzerland was arrested for engaging in, as sort of a piece of art project for buying many things over the internet, including drugs, I think, was part of it. But the problem there is that, well, the entity was just considered property. Like any other property that would be used in illegal, illicit activity was seized because it didn't have autonomous aspects to it. So just something to think about from there.
So I see Aaron, but I also want...
Houman touched on a lot
because
of-
it's Elizabeth's turn, actually.
Sorry, I apologize.
So if you can wait a minute. Then.
Sorry.
We have lots to discuss still. So interestingly, with the nomenclature involved, there's a bit of a conundrum, because when you use the word smart contracts and smart organizations, it makes us humans feel a little dumb, right? So I don't know, maybe we're something to consider. But so as I mentioned, a lot of my work involves the internet, and it's something that I've been passionate about from a fairly early age. And what attracted me to this space was the potential for a new internet using this type of technology. So Aaron talked about the blockchain. And one of the things that this type of technology can provide is a degree of distributed authenticity. And doing so, it makes us question, what does trust mean? For example, we have centralized, say, intermediaries, a bank, a corporation, a university, a law firm. With this kind of network, while we trust the network as a whole or trust the underlying technology of the network, we do not trust any individual participant underlying the network. So for example, we heard previously about the human rights issues and how if people could more easily upload video or even verify that, that would be really helpful. Well, you can use this kind of technology, for example, to timestamp a video or other evidence, to use public-private key cryptography to prove that it was taken at the time that it was actually taken. And you can use it to verify that, say, a given document, photo, or video has not been corrupted. And this previously has not been possible to the global extent and in this distributed manner that it is now. So that, to me, is what's incredibly exciting. People hear a lot about Bitcoin. With the Bitcoin blockchain, and we mentioned there are a variety of different aspects and types of these technologies, that currency is used actually to incentivize the network to be secure. So Bitcoin is really, interestingly, in its technology, an exercise of incentives, where you have this underlying token and asset that is paid out to people that act to secure the network. So in terms of engaging with legal technology. For example, we talked about with smart contracts. To me, if you have, say, small value transactions, previously you weren't going to hire a lawyer for a transaction that might involve, say, $5 or $20, right? You also didn't have access to currency in the way that you now do with the distributed, decentralized cryptocurrencies for people to be able to transact. You maybe had to have a financial institution involved, and that was a more trusted manner of doing so. I'm an advisor, I think we're both advisors, to a project called Augur. It is a decentralized prediction market. Now, here in the US, there are legal issues around the CFTC, but elsewhere, if people knew about InTrade, for example, it was very accurate in predicting the results of elections. We now can use this technology to have a completely decentralized network that uses both decentralized reputation and then also currency to be able to predict, this is still very early on, by the way, potentially effectively what the future will hold. And it's the space, there are a lot of interesting legal gray areas that I'm sure we'll discuss a little bit more of where, for example, crypto equity. I know you've done a lot of work there. Can you issue equity using a blockchain right now? Technically, yes. Will the SEC allow it? Well, we have new, crowdfunding laws, but it's still unclear. So what I want to get across broadly is this is not just about a currency or even one aspect of smart contract technology. There's the potential to build all sorts of decentralized applications that can help really access to the law, access to marketplaces and populations that wouldn't previously be able to do so.
Yeah, I mean, it's digital architecture. So, you can build a global payment system. I mean, that is effectively what Bitcoin is. So that's one piece of global infrastructure. The second thing you can build with it is one thing we haven't talked about is really voting. I mean, that's something you need to verify. So to the extent that you don't care about your identity, there's some issues with pure public voting, but if you don't actually care about people knowing what your vote is, which is really applicable in terms of organizations, it's great. And the other area where it's also great is for contracts, for building out a language so that we can actually express the architecture of our world. And you can build that and now deploy that on a global scale, and in a scale that's digestible both by humans, but also by machines. So it has the ease of use that all these digital technologies that we use today. And what that means when you combine voting and when you start combining contracts, that leads to things like marketplaces. So now we can build global digital marketplaces. That means that somebody, just like someone in Africa today can go online and access information on the internet, it's not inconceivable that in the future people will be able to go online and access a global marketplace just as easily as they do, maybe on their phone or somewhere else, because it's available much like the internet. And once you combine those things together, now we're talking about marketplaces, we're talking about using computable contracts. Well, there's a whole theory about corporations as being really just an assembly of contracts. So you can start building not just corporations, but organizations. So kind of the next step in our peer-to-peer production. So a lot of things that we do online, we do in a very disorganized way. There's no leaders, there's no control. The authority isn't distributed in any efficient way. Well, that might be beneficial, and we may want to incentivize people in a productive way to build things together. So that, I don't need to know you, and we may be in different countries, but we may have similar interests and want to build something together online. And this is the technology that may enable us to do that. And so you can see over time that we may start building organizations, larger organizations online, to do things that we like and actually start producing things together in a productive way. So it has huge implications for open source. And the last thing is really our property. We need to quantify things around us. We've been doing this for hundreds and hundreds of years. And unfortunately, it's been done in a paper way. We're moving away from a paper-based society, and it's going to be a long process. But the beginning of that process is beginning to happen now, because once you can put into a database and know with certainty, because it cannot be corrupted, that a fact occurred, if that data is correct and it's in that database, you can start to record things like property. So imagine if it was just as easy to transfer property from the US to China, as it is to send an email. I mean, this is something that will take years to work towards, but we're beginning to see the glimmers of that hope and these types of global digital architectures that we can really build together to start improving things like access to justice. And a lot of other things.
I actually have a question I want to pose to my fellow panelists. Is that okay?
Yeah, but first I would like to ask Harm whether he wants to say something about what is really the new opportunity of the blockchain. Because you have been
we are mostly lawyers probably in this room, so I think it's a very interesting article online. It's IBM and Samsung build a prototype for a smart contract platform. And the reason they build it is because their washing machines needs to be online. So they build technology where the washing machine is connected to the blockchain. And by using smart contracts, that washing machine is actually able to send a message to the Samsung office when there is a warranty or the device is broken, or it can order washing soap. So the washing machine itself has a wallet, so it can pay for repair. So they are actually deploying these type of technology within use cases that will happen in the near future. So I think it's a very interesting paper to read as a lawyer to get a better feeling on the technology itself. And this is just a very simple example on how companies like IBM and Samsung are using this technology to change the legal world. There is no warranty anymore. It's all automated, and the device itself will do the work. And one of the examples they give is that in a neighborhood, maybe you can do your wash during night together, and you get a discount on the price you pay for one wash. So that's all that will be automated. And if you create a decentralized company of 10 washing machines, you can maybe get a discount of the energy agency. So that's typically an example people in the blockchain community use on what will happen with the Internet of Things. And I think, yeah, one of the legal things that will happen is that we also will get an Internet of contracts with all kinds of legal relationships that we need to manage as a lawyer.
So you wanted to ask a question?
Yeah,
Elizabeth.
so I come from the camp of Code's Law, Lessig, I know several of us do. And one of my fears in a world in which we have these autonomous, corporations or smart contracts or computable contracts is a world of perfect enforcement. And a world where you don't have the human involvement and you may not have the due process that we have in our current system. So my question is, how do we avoid this future of perfect enforcement, and how do we have due process?
But, I don't think that the perfect enforcement, I think, is a great concept to start to tease things out. I don't think there will be fully perfect enforcement. And, I think it's a challenging question because you're dealing with the creation of source codes. That runs into obvious First Amendment concerns. So I do think increasingly the answers are really going to be much more behavioral and market-based, and incentivizing people to build the right types of contracts, to build the right types of systems in such a way that they don't have these draconian effects. And these cascading effects, so you could imagine an interconnected network of hundreds of thousands of contracts interdependent on each other, and some sort of awful event happens and it causes a great deal of harm that can't be unraveled. And I think you ultimately rely on our courts and regulators maybe to try to start to shape the appropriate boundaries for it in a sensible way.
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical of complete automated everything, of course. So the benefits of automation are, I guess, pretty obvious, but there could be costs to it as well. In other words, are you willing to live by what software code determines your property allocation should be, what it determines, maybe other terms of an agreement? So certainly, again, looking to finance, many more things could be automated than are now, but parties realize that there are also benefits to keeping things to some extent manual, providing intervention mechanisms by humans. And in fact, for example, most loan contracts have terms that are purposely sort of ambiguous to allow parties to renegotiate. Most commercial loans, or at least a large portion of them, have one party or another, the borrower typically violating the covenant, at least on a technical basis. But the lender typically waives it, or maybe they renegotiate the loan. And in other words, what they're not doing is committing themselves 100% upfront to a very uncertain future and to being locked into some outcome or several types of outcomes. So automation is largely good, but I think we should, even if we could have full automation of processes, think about the costs as well, just from a business point of view.
Thank you for bringing this up, because full automation also assumes that we already understand how the law is computation, because that was also a slogan that was mentioned earlier today. The law can be thought of as computation, but it is not that transparent how the law is computation. So for instance, in my field of research, artificial intelligence and law, we are really thinking about that, and it is already taking a few decades at least, if not longer, to model what lawyers are doing in a computational format. And actually, one of my own hobby horses is that it works both ways. So we have been speaking a lot here today about how technology is going to change the law, but my hobby horse is that it will also work the other way around. So I really believe that also technology will have to change in order to be adaptive to the law and what it needs are, let's say. And because the law does have some special properties that make it different. It is not a coincidence, let's say, that it has been hard for already some decades to make complete enforcement or to model contracts and everything in a complete way. For instance, one thing that you all know about is that an aspect of the law is that we are arguing with each other in order to find a reasonable solution to a problem or something like that. So it is also a path through a search space that you are finding out together. There is also an element of creation every now and then, because you want to have an answer to the specific situation. And one thing that has been underlying also some of the ideas about smart contracts, etc., is that you can represent everything in full detail beforehand. But one nice thing about the law is that it is also very adaptive to the specific situations. Maybe some of you would like to comment on the.
Yeah, I mean,
on
one
those
thing,
issues.
I think in terms of automation, so you can build computable contracts that actually plug in human beings into the process. So this is a concept at least in terms of the emerging blockchain-based smart contracting programming languages called an oracle. So the idea is that you write in source code certain conditions. So, I will get paid, if this event occurs, and, but the payment won't happen unless I sign off on it. And they'll bake in a condition, and that says that if I don't sign off on it, then it will pop out to a third-party arbitrator. So, right now, those third-party arbitrators could be a panel of people. They could be assembled online. But it's completely conceivable that you could also use some sort of AI or machine learning or some sort of other type of system to start determining those disputes. But the idea is, you can build highly automated systems that also still maintain some of the ambiguity that's necessary, some of that, the softer connective tissue that we need in order to do business, in order to push things forward, in order to insert human judgment. But I do think that smart contracts and computable contracts do have a real value in terms of areas where you want certainty. So before, when there was always the opportunity, if you enter into a contract, to opportunistically breach, even if you didn't intend to at the time. And when you can actually represent this in source code, you can get rid of that risk. And in certain instances, people do want certainty. So in a lot of financial transactions, and this is why I think it's really getting some traction in the financial world, you want certainty. You want to know if it hits a certain price, I'm going to get paid. There's no ambiguity about that. But with service contracts and other things, I think you're going to see a lot more human judgment baked into these autonomous computable contract systems.
So, are there already people in the audience who want to say something? Yes? Yeah, please take the mic. Peter.
Yeah, Peter, hi. Super interesting topic, and it feels to me like the ultimate future law. I'm on like these email lists, 2015. Lawyers are like, so e-signatures. Nah, So 2 questions. 1, what do you see as the role of lawyers in this? And 2, do you have any thoughts about like how to speed up adoption? Because this seems like...
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the second question?
Speed up adoption.
Speed up adoption.
I think you can make a parallel to the financial industry. Within the banks, the smart traders are working with smart coders. So I think that will happen in legal as well. The real smart lawyers will hire the smartest coders, and they will eventually get the best business.
Yeah, and I think adoption is going to increase because the technology is just getting easier to use. So there's an emerging blockchain technology called Ethereum. It's what actually was IBM used to build their smart washing machine. The paper's called Device Democracy, just in case anybody wants to find it. But yeah, just to give you an example, and I can show this to anybody who wants it, on the plane ride over here from New York, I programmed a smart contract using and stored information in an Ethereum blockchain. It took me 4 hours, and I built a whole user interface. So what does that mean? That means
What did it do?
it's just an independent contract agreement. So you fill in your basic terms. It had the ability to set up how much you're going to get paid. It emailed you off the bat for signature. It electronically signed it. It timestamped it. It verified it, and then it pinged you when it's completely signed. So this is really basic, but the idea is it's pretty easy. I mean, I program. I'm not particularly good. I'm kind of self-taught. But the languages are getting easier, the technology is getting easier, and a lot of the things that we need in terms of customization will be available to people who are reasonably proficient technologically, and that will increase adoption.
I think that adoption would increase too just by attorneys becoming more fluent with software, with coding, not necessarily knowing how to program from scratch, but understanding the concepts, the processes involved. And right now in the blockchain space, there are a lot of blockchain-based platforms that are probably more suited for commercial applications than the Bitcoin blockchain itself, like the Ripple network, like Eris Industries from London. So there's a lot of commercially sort of viable or close to them processes already working out there, and basically bringing the benefits of a distributed ledger, a replicated ledger system to banks and corporates.
If necessity is the mother of invention, it's also the mother of adoption. So I do think we'll see situations in which people maybe previously didn't have access to, say, a huge legal presence or very sophisticated contracts. The emerging kind of developing world, for example, this is a little bit different, but with Bitcoin as a currency, Argentina has, New York Times ran a piece about this this past weekend, adopted it in part because they've had significant currency issues. So I believe that we'll see adoption in areas where contracts or other aspects of this technology might not have been tenable or affordable, but it can be automated at the small scale.
So I would like to give you the floor, sir.
Sure. Thinking about computable contracts, one of the perverse advantages of manual, bespoke human-made contracts is that they're all a little bit different. Right, so if you find a loophole in one, it's not easy to exploit it in other ones, right? They're all slightly different. But again, thinking about computable contracts, right? It's infeasible to verify the correctness of any code that's more than trivial, right? It just can't really be done. So it's inevitable when you're thinking about the code that the compilers, let's say, that generate these contracts, the code that interprets them, that they're going to be bugs. It's a certainty that that's going to happen. And these aren't bugs like, oh, my Xbox game broke, I can reboot it. These are bugs that have legally binding ramifications, right? That you may have to do something legally because of how this contract came out. So my question to you then is, who do we expect to assume the liability of these outcomes? It's certainly not going to be the software engineers that write the software. If you looked at any EULA, hands off. No software engineer could guarantee the code's going to be correct. So in that kind of future world, which otherwise sounds very enticing, who do we expect to assume the liability when things inevitably are going to go wrong when bugs are in the code?
But I think that is not really changed. The law will not really change. So it's only the implementation of the law that changes.
Yeah, I guess
So,
the thing I
but
want to emphasize
if you have a self-driving car and this car makes a mistake, then there is product liability, and I don't think that will change. Only
I think the two distinctions I want to make are, one, when there are bugs in the code, they can be exploited at scale. So millions.
yeah, I
of
agree.
contracts-
But if there is in the financial industry, there was a mistake by one trader and it causes a flash crash of $20 billion. So, but it's a mistake, but that's still, there is still the law and the regulation of the SEC that governs that computable contract.
Do you expect the users of the contracts will remain liable for the code that they're running to compute the contract?
I think
Depends on the law, but in the Netherlands we have product liability. So
I think it's also two separate questions. So the first question is the system that is actually processing the contracts, and then it's the code that's being written. So the code that's being written, I think it's completely reasonable that the person that writes the code, they write it in a way that doesn't work. The liability should be on them.
That just never happens in software.
No, of course it happens, but that happens in life too, and it happens. It just does, and then you need to hire a better lawyer who may be programming your contracts. So maybe that's the situation. The second one is the actual infrastructure, the piece that's processing it, and that's a lot like the questions of the internet and the internet security. And right now it's pretty cruddy, just like the early internet was. But over time, the security on the internet has increased. The one advantage, though, which I think is really cool about computable contracts in terms of the programming languages, there's actually, you can look this up, it's called Mint Chalk, but you can actually press play and build a smart contract, press play and simulate it before you execute it. I mean, imagine doing that, sitting down at the table, having your business people say, how do we want this to go? All right, let's sketch it out, pass it over to some really futuristic lawyers. They code it up, they press play. Is this what you guys wanted? Yep, all right, cool, done. I mean, that type of certainty we don't have now. And again, these glimmers are beginning to emerge.
Thank you.
And I want one more comment. I think the law will follow what will happen with the blockchain. So in the case of Bitcoin now, it's a limited, it's just $2 billion of value or 3 billion. So no one cares. If Bitcoin was 3 trillion of value, then the SEC would have definitely stopped it. So I think the law will follow what the innovation will do, but yeah.
As the law goes.
Yeah.
Shall we go to the next question?
Hello, my project, which is an experiment in converting legal source material into a programming language, allowing for things like temporal logic and relations among entities. It looks like it was trying to build a code database for how you represent all these different legal principles in code. And my question is this a problem that's been solved? Is this still a fertile area of research that's going on, and does it relate to any of these topics we've been talking about?
I think that we don't have anyone on the panel that knows this specific project, or do we? No, so then I will give my general AI answer, right? I think I will have to give the answer. So clearly this is not a solved problem, of course not. So we are not ready. So if you would go to San Diego in a month or so, and I said that you are, that's great, then you will see that we are still struggling as AI researchers. So for instance, the issue of knowledge representation in a way that is relevant for the law as it is already in the days of Hammurabi, that is clearly not solved. It's a deep issue. Unfortunately, these days, knowledge representation is not one of the most popular areas in artificial intelligence. So let's say that the learning side is right now the best funded side of artificial intelligence. And the issue is, in the law, complex structures are actually relevant. So the devil is in the details. You really need to know the relevant conditions of your situations, etc. Those structures can be complex. It is not a coincidence that lawyers are using a complex legalese. There are reasons for that. Of course, there are also sometimes mistakes or exaggerations of the legalese, etc. But in principle, we are trying to make the laws such that they fit exactly for the situations. Not simpler than possible, something like that. And we in artificial intelligence are working on that. And for me, one of the deep issues today is, and that is also a technological challenge, is we do have those learning techniques that are very good for the adaptation of things. So for instance, that's why machine learning is so popular. You have data and the data grows, etc. And the patterns that you find in the data will then also change with the data set, let's say. So that's very adaptive. We do not really understand as artificial intelligence researchers how that combines with all those complex knowledge structures. So in a sense, both sides of artificial intelligence, where the complex structures are with logic techniques, etc., and the learning side, where there are the shallow patterns, we don't really know how these combine, let's say. And I believe that actually by looking at how the law works, we may learn something about those combinations. And well, that's what we are working on.
On a somewhat related note, today throughout the event and conference, I was thinking, why don't we have more open standards? I cannot stress the importance of open standards and the role that they've played for the internet, but one of the things I hope that we have with the emergence of smart contracts and more computable contracts is open standards, so all these different technologies and systems can talk to each other. So that's something I'd love to see more of.
And that's something that's really going on in the financial regulatory space. Financial regulators are trying to develop and help companies develop common standards for them to present, format, and represent data so they can help to monitor and regulate them.
Yeah. Shall we go to the next question? No, so it's your turn.
Okay, I'm going to be cheeky. I'm totally drinking the Kool-Aid on all this stuff, and I recently rebought a car in 14 hours with Bank of America completely online, and the only thing that took time was I had to go to the DMV. But here's my challenge. I think you were talking earlier about the human and the code. I will get $1 million from people if anybody can fix United Airlines call center, Time Warner call center, and all these call centers where you cannot get a human being and they do not recognize what you're calling for because you're not calling in the 5 little buckets that they want. I think everybody in this room would contribute money to me on this if we could get this done. And I think the secret is you have to have really accessible, good codes. I signed up for that HPP Inc. deal where it automatically counts everything I use. And I didn't read the TOS, and I ended up with a $21 bill on something that should have been $4. I called them, they took care of the whole thing. And of course I quit the thing, but there's a lot of consumer stuff going on, and I'm sure I'm probably kind of awkward here. But I think that's something that's really crucial for success of these sorts of things, because, you know, you have to keep me away from knives when I call United Airlines. United Airlines pilot.
I usually find agent. Agent usually gets me to a human. I don't know if that works for you, but.
I'm a huge believer in blockchain technology, but I don't know if that's a problem that it can solve.
So we should not forget that computers nowadays still don't understand much about us, right? So even though we try, the law actually reasonably understands what we are trying to do, because, well, we have made it such that it is relevant for what we are doing. But computers, well, even in these days of Google, big data, Facebook, we tell them a lot, right, these machines. So we give them a lot of our privacy, but they don't understand us, not yet. Some small things, but okay.
That's actually a good segue into my question, perhaps, because I happen to know someone in the industry who does that kind of programming. It's the same problem that's in the legal industry, which is getting corporations to invest in technology, because the technology does exist to make those IVR systems work better than they do. It's just a matter of investing and corporate culture and all the stuff that we're very aware of. But anyway, my name is Susan, and I'm interested in cross-industry collaboration with industries that may be further ahead on the maturity curve, perhaps, than law. Perhaps like infrastructure, carriers, cloud technology, mobile phone technology, telecommunications. And something I know that industry is working on is network function virtualization, where you have a dynamic marketplace for provisioning cloud technology. So I'm just wondering if you know of any crossover to your projects, or if that's a reasonable application of what you're talking about, and where that kind of collaboration may be occurring if it is relevant to your topic.
Are you talking about cloud technology specifically, or?
Yeah, cloud tech.
So this is, again, going back to this IBM paper, it's great. They've got a great infographic there. Basically, the blockchain is for data structures that are too big for the cloud. So we're going to get to that point pretty quickly. I mean, if there's 50 billion internet-enabled devices that are transmitting data periodically, that's a huge amount of data set, and it can't scale at this point with one singular centralized source. So blockchain technology is a distributed peer-to-peer system, and if they can solve scalability issues, which is a big if, then this is what the deep technology, the forward-leaning technologies at IBM and other places view it as, is kind of the evolution of cloud computing, the next step.
In some ways, it's actually the anti-cloud,
Yeah.
Given that you have a greater distribution, say, of personal devices. For example, we mentioned some of the applications, but say your identity right now, your identity and information associated with it, maybe your social security number was stored with Anthem. I was an Anthem customer, right? That's stored in the cloud, and that was not encrypted, and then it was compromised. When you have greater decentralization, both on the network via this peer-to-peer means, but also via devices, you actually have the situation in which you don't have data all in one place that can be compromised in that way, which is really powerful.
Yeah, the trust is in the network. It's not in one centralized server. So Google, get a great example, wonderful company, amazing products. It's been hacked. I mean, we can't trust that. That's fine now, but when you actually have things that are controlling autonomous devices, like a self-driving car, if that's hacked, I mean, that's a really big deal. I mean, that's a much bigger deal than having your security compromised on your email. I mean, that's pretty horrific. But we're talking about much harder problems, and that's why you need to distribute the trust. It needs to be by default encrypted, and it needs to be by default secured. I mean, Google right now cannot turn all of its servers and take down the Bitcoin network. I mean, that's pretty impressive. They've got so much computational power, and they can't even take down the network if they decided to, for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Ethereum project, so I'll look for that white paper.
So we are already going to the final question, because it's time. So.
All right, if I may, I will propose something and even volunteer to help if anyone wants to take this up. And I believe it is tractable. It would be at the lowest lexical level of language analysis, that is to say, morphological as opposed to syntactical. And it involves legislation instead of contract. So here goes. Why don't you take a very modest word set, call it United States Code. Why don't you take the individual words in United States code and just apply something akin to visual thesaurus to see if we can come up with a way to identify lexical similarity and dissimilarity, because just citing the judicial corpus of Antonin Scalia involving single word cases without looking any further, I can recite 4 such cases right off the bat, including the words, okay? Chisholm versus Romer, representative. Casey versus West Virginia Hospital, that word was attorney, as an attorney fee. Pierce versus Underwood, that word would have been substantially. And AT&T versus MCI, the word would have been modify. In each of those cases, the comparison of that word in one provision of United States Code to another provision that had a similar or a distinct word proved pivotal to at least Justice Scalia's position, and in 3 of those 4 cases he wrote for the court. So it appears that this very idea of lexical units to write contracts could be generalized to other parts of the law. And instead of playing with contracts, which require a lot of people to agree, and there's a coordination problem of epic proportions, why not take aim at legislation and persuade just one code writing entity out there to be willing to take it on? And besides, as I just said, it's lexically and computationally really simple, so much so that somebody with no training like me would be willing to volunteer to work on that.
Thank you. But that was more like a comment, right? So I have...
Sense, or am I just completely nuts?
No, it's interesting.
I do think that, you know, I think there is a possibility, and this is just kind of a thought experiment, but if you have a lot of internet-enabled devices, let's say a car, you could imagine, and you have a decentralized identity system like the one Elizabeth just mentioned, you can imagine separate rules applying to that property depending on who you are. So if you're a felon, you get out of jail, you walk into a car, you're not allowed to speed. The rules are actually hardwired through software into the machine. And if you may not be able to speed, maybe they say you can't, drive past 10 o'clock. And if you're just a law-abiding citizen who's never had that type of situation, you would have complete control over that property. And I think that these are some pointing also towards the downside of this world that may be emerging, which is with granular ability to control things through source code, there's also significant harshness to it. And these are the challenges that I think somebody asked what lawyers' role will be. Well, this is part of the role of lawyers, is how to figure out the appropriate boundaries. So we live in a world that we like to live in and not one that's dictated by the harshness of source code.
I would like to close this session on new breakthroughs in computational law with a question to the audience. Who of you think of yourselves as being the next generation that are going to make the change? So who of you are really the change makers? Well, not even everyone. I was expecting that. So that's, of course, the real end of this panel. Let's build this better future together, something like that. I would like to thank the panelists. Thank you very much. I also think that it is time also to thank the organizers of this conference, because otherwise maybe that will not happen. Yeah. Roland Vogel, Mike Genezareth, and Nicole Shanahan have worked very hard.